Hello and welcome to Makor. Gives me great pleasure to see a full crowd tonight for what promises to be a really stimulating and interesting conversation between two foremost thinkers.
Deilig og rik og framme bland kvinner I Babylon, god fruktig og visbar den prisna.
And by the way, no announcements of upcoming meetings. I'm not sitting there for any of that.
Okay.
And next week we're going to have. We asked so but he couldn't come. So.
Do you want me to warn them of that? Or
yes. No announcements of upcoming meetings.
We have music, film, classes, community service, recreation, and many other offerings. So please check out our fall catalog in the lobby on your way out.
What are you expecting tonight in this debate?
A rambunctious debate.
Are you ready to rumble?
I'm ready to rumble.
That's very, very exciting. Do we have everything to fear, including fear itself, as you have once said before?
We have everything to fear, including fear itself, and the bad news hasn't yet hit, I don't think.
I think you may be right.
We're all into a losing struggle. No one has ever beaten these odds. I've looked up ahead, or if you prefer, down the road. I know what's coming. I know no one beats these odds. And it's a matter of getting used to that and growing up and realizing that you're expelled from your mother's uterus as if shot from a cannon towards a barn door studded with old nail files and rusty hooks. It's a matter of how you use up the intervening time in an intelligent and ironic way and try not to do everything ghastly to your fellow creatures. That leaves us with the question of why should we care? Somehow I'm glad that at least that bit of our innate nature is useful. But if we praise ourselves for what's innate, we're going to be praising a lot of very unpleasant things too. And there's no way around that. There's only the pretense that there's a way around it.
So we do have everything to fear, including fear itself.
And to add, by the way, and also, if you ask me, I think we have free will. And how do I know that? Because we have no choice but to have free will.
Are you prepared for an eloquence like Hitch today? Do you think you're up for it today? Are you feeling good?
You know, I'm a representative of something far greater than myself. So let it just flow through me.
You're going to do it with the photo. All right, fine. Now, once again, Anna Wintour in the 70s. It's a pressing question everyone in America wants to know.
Nobody, I think even including me, would have believed that the Anna Wintour of the early 2000s would be more beautiful, more poised, more fragrant, more slender than she was even in the 1970s. But somehow she's managed to do it. So.
But are you serious?
Yes, I couldn't be more serious.
Okay.
I couldn't be more serious. And I know that she's not a believer, so I just want to know what it is she's taking so I can have some too.
Could you elaborate on that?
Well, atheism is about an absence. It's a void. It's saying there's no God. Clearly, atheism cannot impart values. So what I'm going to try to show is when you remove religious values, what do you get in return? What supplants it? What replaces it? Evolutionary values is what supplants it, and we have to compare those two worldviews. The religious worldview.
Can a morality exist towards other people without faith in a deity?
Of course not, because they'll all be arbitrary. They will be man-made laws, and that's fine, but that means man can modify those laws to suit his own needs. And if we have learned one thing, both from religious people and secular people, is that man is not a trustworthy arbiter of good and evil, right and wrong.
I don't know, because I don't know. What are your thoughts on Kitty Kelly?
Kitty Kelly is a great reporter, but she's not a great political analyst, I don't believe. She was right about Nancy Reagan, and she was right about the British royal family. But remember, Nancy Reagan claimed to be the president when no one had elected, was consulting astrologers, and the British royal family claims that it has a divine right, a hereditary right to rule. The reason why her book on Bush is no good is because it's not comparing like with like. She's not disputing or destroying any claim that anyone ever believed in to begin with, either for or against. So this one, I'm afraid, is not going to make it. As for Frank, I didn't read it because I've never cared whether Frank Sinatra lived or indeed died.
It's funny, people think that I support George W. Bush because of support for Israel. It's not that at all. The defining moment of modern Jewish history was the Holocaust, when not a lot of people cared that 6 million Jews were being slaughtered wholesale. I believe that an Arab life is the equivalent of a Jewish life. I therefore greatly support President Bush for intervening in Iraq and stopping the wholesale slaughter of his people. I think that we in the West who have the power and the resources to stop genocide must do so that we truly, so that when we use the words never again, there's meat in those words, that they're actually meant. They're not just some sort of empty verbiage.
Have you ever encountered Camille Paglia, and what do you think of her?
Once with Camille Paglia I did a show. I was the host of it, in fact. And I remember she spent a colossal amount of time in this was a Channel 4 show for England. It was done from Washington. And she still holds the record for spending time in the makeup room of anyone I've ever met or ever heard about, with, I'm sorry to say, the least a show for it. But I don't want to be ungallant. But I now wonder why I haven't heard this name for 10 years. What happened? Didn't she used to go around with bodyguards and have tell people to take a number and form a line if they even wanted to breathe the same air as her? That's what happens to narcissists, I believe. Right. The great thing about Washington women, in case you wanted to ask, or before you ask, is this. I think my life changed when I moved to Washington because I became a really hard worker. With a person of almost iron self-discipline. I built my own workspace at home. I never went to an office anymore, didn't hang out with people at lunch. Got on with it. If I wasn't reading, I was writing. It's because there are no distractions in Washington, D.C.
So there are no women of note.
Washington was like taking my vow. It was like becoming a friar.
I feel that with the bureaucratic building. It doesn't seem that swinging.
I can't recommend the vow of monkhood or friarhood too highly if you want to get on with doing some real work. Washington, you will never dislocate your neck walking down Connecticut Avenue. Try as you might.
Rabbi Boteach, an easy question to start. Is faith helping or hurting the world?
I gotta find out where my kids are. Mendy? Oh, there's no question. All of our values are based on faith. Without faith, you have no concept of law, of absolute law. Law is always arbitrary. It can always be changed. The sanctity of human life, not just the value of human life, but the sanctity of human life is a religious precept. The value of peace over war. You go through all of society's major values; they're all religious values. By definition, atheism can't provide values because atheism is a non-entity. It's not believing in something, so it can't provide values. Our values come from religion.
Keep the camera on. What do you think of Maureen Dowd?
I think she's been running on empty for many years, and I wrote a column in Vanity Fair saying as much in advance, saying don't leave reporting where your style is useful and your inflection is handy and charming and incisive. Don't become a pundit. You haven't got the stuff for it, and she should have listened, shouldn't she?
She's nailing it with that book, actually, though, and I think she's doing okay on her own. My question to you, a preference.
This may be a tough time, and there may be all kinds of political deformities. There are indeed to be attacked and reviewed, but it's not a time for people to are flippant and light-minded. And unfortunately, her attitude towards grave matters is frivolous.
Well, that implies
the way to do it is to be grave about the frivolous. You can get more laughs that way if you learn how to do it.
How about the fanatical element of religion? Why is it happening, and how can it be stopped?
Because it's based on the idea that you're supposed to be religious for the sake of being religious, not for being a good person. The important thing is ethical religion, which emphasizes first and foremost that we are on this earth to behave like good and decent people and practice compassion and emphasize the equality of all mankind, regardless of ethnicity or religious faith.
The First Lady, Laura Bush. Do you want to comment on her?
The First Lady is the first lady of whom I've ever thought, I wonder what that would be like. And having the thought occur, can't quite get it out of my head again.
She is. Are you saying that she's?
So who are you going to propose? Bess Truman, the overrated Jackie.
Right.
Actually, Betty Ford. No, but I was the wrong age.
How would you?
Islam has a glorious tradition of religious tolerance, even religious pluralism. Remember that Islam, unlike Christianity, did not force others to adopt its faith. There weren't forced conversions. So we have to get the moderates to reclaim their faith.
Part of the war that we're fighting is against the promiscuous unilateralism of French colonial policy in the Middle East and Africa. And it's been high time that a confrontation took place between it and us, and I welcome it. I don't mind the confrontation at all. I don't want Mr. Chirac in Iraq. I don't want the hero of Rwanda and Côte d'Ivoire or his troops anywhere near any enterprise of rescue.
But isn't it just too much blatant Americanism to go in there and win these contracts and just take them for ourselves? Isn't that a little rough down the line?
Suppose it was the other way around. Picture this, if you will. Suppose that the world community had, in fact, decided to live up to its resolutions on Iraq and say it's too long that one regime has been denying and negating them and is in breach of them. We need an international rescue operation for Iraq. That would have been very nice. It didn't happen. No one even offered to help, as it turns out. But suppose that had been the view. Who would have got the job of enforcing it? Who would have had to provide the planes? Who would have had to provide the manpower? Who would have had to do the heavy lifting? You know very well that would have been the United States.
Now, until this moment, I have never heard you support any president, and you're supporting an idiot. Why?
Well, I was in favor of regime change in Iraq when the president was still governor of Texas and still running against it and running against nation building. So, I'm grateful for his support. It's not perfect, but I argue with everybody in the hope I can win them over to my side. I don't say that I don't want you on my side if I don't agree with you on everything else.
Tonight's debate over the future of faith is entitled God and Religion, Divine Treasure, or Poisonous Bilge. This is a debate that has existed in different forms for millennia. Since 9/11, however, the question of religion's relevance for people's lives and utility for society has spiked in urgency. The debate tonight is, to my knowledge, the first time in recent years that this question is being confronted head-on in a public forum. We are fortunate to have two formidable and fearless thinkers, Rabbi Shmuley Boteach and Christopher Hitchens, to help clarify our own thinking on this central issue for the world today. As they do, we expect sparks will fly. And we are also very fortunate to have as our moderator Mark Derry. Mark is a culture critic and professor at New York University, where he teaches in the Department of Journalism, a frequent commentator on new media, fringe thought, and unpopular culture. He is the editor of Flame Wars, The Discourse of Cyberculture, and the author of Escape Velocity, Cyberculture at the End of the Century. His most recent book is the essay collection, The Pyrotechnic Insanitarium, American Culture on the Brink, which also has a wonderful website to go along with it. His 1993 essay on guerrilla media activism, culture jamming, hacking, slashing, and sniping in the empire of science, is the manifesto that kickstarted the culture jamming movement. Currently, Mark is writing Don Henley Must Die, a drive-by critique of Southern California, where he grew up, and where he morphed during the born-again 70s into a Jesus Christ superstar wannabe, complete with long hair, bell sleeves, and brooding messianic, "Forgive them, Father, they know not what they do," stare. Please welcome Mark Derry, who will introduce the other speakers tonight.
When Alabama's Chief Justice, the Ten Commandments judge Roy Moore, appeared before a special court to face ethics charges last November, the New York Times reporter covering the rally outside the courthouse described supporters blowing ram's horns and a strapping dude in a combat helmet and flak jacket ready to wage war for God, unquote. Pat Buchanan's Culture Conf is back with a vengeance as the true believers square off with the godless orcs of Mordor, also known as secular humanists, on issues such as prayer in the schools, gay marriage, and this laughable blasphemy newly arrived from the continent, the notion that man evolved from tool-wielding apes. Of course, America holds no copyright on fervent belief, as the rise of Islamic fundamentalism makes thumpingly obvious. So the question is, why now? Never before have the technological advances of humankind been so out of step with humankind's religious beliefs. Freud, Old Testament prophet that he was, warned us of the fundamentally incommensurate nature of religion and science. Quote, "It would be an undoubted advantage if we were to leave God out altogether and admit the purely human origins of all the precepts and regulations of civilization," he noted in The Future of an Illusion. So now, on the eve of the future, we find ourselves poised or is it torn between the secular and the sacred, between reason and faith? Which shall win? We may not decide that question tonight, but at the very least, it should be highly stimulating and highly entertaining. We have two discussants who are Abel Furman, Christopher Hitchens, who I like to think of as the vicar at God's funeral, has written a marvelous book, The Missionary Position, in which he takes aim at the plaster saint of Mother Teresa and reduces her to smithereens. He is, of course, well known to all of you from his many books and media appearances, and most notably his wonderful recent book about George Orwell, Why Orwell Matters, an extraordinary piece of scholarship and historical spade work, I think. We also have with us Rabbi Shmuley Boteach, the author of Kosher Sex. I just love saying that. As well as Judaism for Everyone. Presumably that means a hopeless goyim such as myself who uses mayonnaise over mustard. And both of them have some profound thoughts on the relevance of religion or not to the moment we live in. Christopher Hitchens will begin with the first volley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Perhaps suspiciously terse, but delightful introduction. Thank you for what appears to be some kosher ale with which to wet the whistle. Happy New Year. Shalom to all those of you who believe that that's how time is actually allocated. Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, comrades. How I'm going to use up 20 minutes for this argument, I do not yet know. It's more or less a 5-minute job, I think, to demolish the deadly virtues before one gets on to the sins. But I suppose we can't hop over the ontological question, can we? In other words, one must begin in some way by saying, is there any truth to any of this at all, any ground for rational humane belief? There's some well-known objections to this, which I won't pain you by over-rehearsing, but all arguments for the existence of God, certainly for a God who has an ethical property, but for a God at all, I must add and stipulate, is essentially arguments from design. There appears to be some sort of order to the universe. There appears to be some kind of rhythm to the seasons. There appears to be some point, indeed, at least from our own point of view, in our own nature. How could this happen purely by accident? It was Bishop Paley, I think, in his natural philosophy, who first said, if you're a cannibal or a savage, I excuse the expression, I hope you will too, an ignoramus, a peasant, you find a watch on a beach, you may not know what the watch is for, but you can tell it's not a rock or a vegetable. It's for something and somebody made it. Who is this watchmaker? The objection, I dare say, is equally well known to all of you. It leads to an infinite regression. Who designed the watchmaker then? And who designed the watchmaker's watchmaker? It gets you actually nowhere at all. Even if you do believe it, it will only take you further back into what is mysterious, and I'm going to stress this point more than once, I think, what is essentially unknowable about the cosmos and the origin not just of species and of life, but of matter itself. And in this journey, this search for the infinite regression, for the watchmaker's watchmaker, the origins of watchmaking and watchmakers, we are, I think, permanently in danger of surrendering to our own solipsism. How can anything, in other words, that leads to ourselves, our wonderful selves, be pointless or random? How can that be? The resistance to this has taken many forms. It used to take a resistance to the form of the simple proposition that the sun revolves around the earth instead of the other way around. Excuse me, not a simple opposition to this, a simple affirmation of it. Of course, the earth is the center and man is the center of that. How could it be otherwise? We are God's children. He wouldn't arrange for us to speculate on anything as cruel as the possibility that it wasn't all on our behalves. But increasingly, we aren't even in the lucky position of those who condemned and threatened to torture Galileo. We don't even have an idea of who this watchmaker might be. We're being asked, in effect, to surrender ourselves permanently to someone whose identity we can't even speculate about. And that's why it annoys me, and I hope some of you too, that those who say they have faith so often present themselves with a shrug, with modesty, with humility. Pardon me, don't mind me at all, I'm just doing God's will. I'm on an errand for the Creator. I just invite you to consider carefully, ladies and gentlemen, comrades, how modest is that? Not terribly. And is there not, therefore, a moral flaw, as well as the self-evident scientific and logical ones, at the very beginning of the argument of those who say that faith is something worth having instead of what I maintain it to be, the surrender of the only thing, our curiosity, our irony, our skepticism, our willingness to inquire, our willingness to doubt ourselves, our willingness to come to conclusions that are not welcome to us. The only faculty, in other words, that distinguishes us from those beasts who can't tell a hawk from a handsaw or a watch from a turnip. More recently, the argument's become, again, I hope I don't patronize you with the obvious, rather more complex. What design exactly? We used to think we knew roughly, okay, you can tell what the solar system is like, you can predict its movements, it has some kind of organization to it, fine. Can this be for nothing? Good question. Who's going to say this about what we now know about the cosmos? All we know now, the most we know, is how little we know about it. It doesn't act in a predictable way. How does curved time, how does the black hole, how does the event horizon fit into this argument from design? The answer is plain. It doesn't fit at all. It's completely incongruent with it. Everything we know, in other words, is arranged against the way we feel. Well, which is going to give way, the thought or the feeling, the emotion or the intellect? The religious have their answer ready-made. I don't. That's the big difference between us, I submit. In Genesis, which is a book held in common for no reason I can understand, by all monotheisms, there are, for example, no microorganisms. When the non-human kingdom is created, there are no microorganisms in it. Microorganisms are very important. They can kill you, for one thing. They're very intricately designed, for another. Religious belief went through various phases about this. When no one knew they were there, they used to say, well, if there's plague, God must want people to die. Except why don't they all die? Or why do some good people die and some bad people not? As an epidemiological observation, not very brilliant. Sometimes in bad moments they say, well, the plague, obviously there's plague because the Jews are putting poison in the water. The rabbi knows this history very well, as no doubt some of you do too. There are no marsupials in Genesis. They didn't even know what animals there were in Australia. There are no dinosaurs in Genesis. It's just that they are in creation. What am I making by way of an observation here? The simplest possible one. What are the odds that God created man when stacked against the odds that man created God? I submit that there is only one possible answer to that question. Of the millions and millions of false gods that have been created, is it likely that they were all equal perceptions of the same truth, from the Aztecs to the Buddhists, or that they're all equally improvised creations by man? Again, there's no possible way of disputing that proposition and making it even seem equal. None. There is a very, very small outside chance that of all these gods, one only one could be the correct one. This actually is the view of all true adherents of all monotheism. The other ones, no, they're a bit fraudulent. But ours, now this is something to kill for. Or perhaps, let's say, make it more compassionate, to die for. You can work out the difference there. And we're living at a time and speaking at a time and studying and reflecting at a time, ladies and gentlemen, when a page of Stephen Hawking is far more awe-inspiring than anything in Genesis or Exodus. Think about what is involved in the event horizon, the point where time begins and ends, the point where the black hole starts, the point where matter and light disappear. Consider it carefully. One of Hawking's friends says if he knew he was going to die, and he knew when, he would want to die by going to the edge of the event horizon and tipping over within, because in theory then, you could see the past and the future. Except, of course, you wouldn't have enough time. But that's innate in physics, not innate in the unfairness of life. Think about that and compare it to the burning bush. Or some other sinister fairy tale. Of course we don't live without awe. We don't live without a sense of the majesty and tremendousness of our universe. And nor do we live in contempt for ourselves. But we don't mistake the fairy tale for the real awe-inspiring stuff. We don't throw away the truffle and chew on the wrapper till our mouths go dry, in other words. So there's no reason to make any assumption about God or his existence or his design or his will. It's neither a necessary assumption, nor a useful one, nor, I think, a moral one. And this means, if I'm correct, and if you follow me this far, that a very important conclusion follows. I will stand before you, I just have, and say there are things I can't know and don't know. There is awe-inspiring and majestic stuff going on where I don't presume to pronounce or to know. I'm happy with this conclusion. I don't mind not knowing. I don't mind submitting it to curiosity and inquiry and skepticism. But what can we say of those who do say they know? Who say they know what, not just who God is, but what his will is? And not just in the macro stuff about the non-creation of marsupials, for example, but in what to eat, and on what day, and what to wear, and what tactics to adopt between the sheets. This is what the holy believe they are entitled to do to you with this warrant from the unknowable divine. The one group that loses this argument before it begins must be those who say they know. They can be dispensed with. We can begin only from those who are willing to subject themselves to uncertainty and to skepticism, and the religious rule themselves out of that argument, as it were, a priori. The phrase mind-torched whack jobs that's in the introduction to this paper this evening naturally upset me very much. I hate to be offensive or to see religion lampooned. That's why I didn't call my book on Mother Teresa Sacred Cow, though I'll always somehow be sorry. Something in me will always feel sorry that I didn't do that. But why is it? Perhaps we should ask ourselves. Belief in religion does not make you a mind-torched whack job. But the appeal of this extraordinary pressure from the supernatural and the unknowable and the numinous and the distortions it imposes does seem to have a tremendous influence on mind-torched whack jobs. It's very seldom you come across a mind-torched whack job who isn't hearing voices and claiming to have instructions from God. Now, here's what I submit to you, and I do it uncynically, I hope. How can we tell that they're not telling the truth? How can we sort out their claim to have heard voices and been given divine instructions from anyone else's? Mr. Abu Musad al-Zarqawi, who is currently trying to take a very important country into a spiral of misery and poverty and shame and fascism, has, I'm thrilled to see, renamed his jihad organization Monotheism and Jihad. How can I tell, how can anyone in this room tell whether his claim to be speaking Quranic truth is any better or any worse than anyone else's? For me, it's an open question. It's unverifiable, it's unprovable, it's unfalsifiable. These are all tests of the weakness of an argument, of course, but anyone who grants the first premise that it may be known, that it may be argued from holy books, that we may have divine instructions, is in no position to tell him that they're right and he's wrong. The only way of winning this argument is to consider all those claims on the same footing and the same basis and reject them, not in turn, but collectively, seriatim. How much am I trespassing on my allotted time?
You're great. You have 10 minutes.
That's very good if you say so. And the 10-minute bit is good too. There's the Seder element in religion, in other words, and the Maso element, if you will. I'll start with the masochistic. Who wouldn't? They say, the Muslim says, Islam means surrender. It says, I feel just lucky to be able to say to God, do what you will with me. I'm unworthy. You were good enough to create me from a clot of blood. I am less than the dust. I surrender to your will, they say. The Christians mire themselves and attempt to mire others in a swamp of guilt and shame. They apologize for their existence, born in sin, wretched sinners to begin with. No invention, no quality, no rights of independence, no triumph of standing on 2 feet and using the brain. No, wretched, scum, condemned, born into a losing struggle, riffraff, groveling, saying, thank God someone was nice enough to be tortured to death 2,000 years ago without my permission so that I will live forever. Abject, serfdom, inviting it, self-hatred, misery. Judaism, rending the clothes, asking to atone, groveling and heaping dust on the shoulders, and indeed praying with thanks if you're a male Jew that you're not a female one. Abject peasantry. That's the masochistic bit. I find it more unattractive than I'll have time to say, but I hope you'll get a rough idea of how I feel about it. But okay, suppose someone thinks, okay, someone was good enough to die for me. I owe him. I'll live this abject, shuffling life. Fine. Wouldn't it make you happy if you thought that someone had gone to all that trouble to save you and you were saved? Wouldn't you feel it? I don't know what it's like to think this nonsense, but suppose I did. I suppose it would be like being in love. That it would be a wonderful secret that you had, that even if the IRS came for you or whatever it might be, they couldn't take this away. you'd be happy with it. It would be something to you. It would be real. Does it make them happy? Question answers itself. They can't be happy till everyone else believes it too. Is this a sign of moral security, comrades, or insecurity, would you say? To what length will they go or not go to make sure that everyone else believes it? Because then they feel, perhaps if everyone believed it, I might be right. Any length is the answer to that. Ask any of them, any length. By their deeds you can know them. Any length. This is dangerous stuff, in other words. It's not just foolish or untrue. It's positively dangerous. There's an attractive bit, but it's cynical. When they don't do the argument from design, they do the wager. That's Pascal, as I'm sure some of you know. We can't know if it's true or not. He's right about that. It's the only religious or ontological proposition that does begin from a correct premise, as a matter of fact. We don't know, but look, what if you bet it's true and you win? You might get who knows what. If you bet it's true and it's not true, what if you lost? Fine. This is the origin, as often with theological and theocratic argument, it's the origin of secularism. Let me put it to you generously then, the other way around. Suppose I think it is true. Suppose I do believe there's a divine creator and supervisor. Wouldn't I expect that he would approve of me more if when I was confronted with him I said, well, you didn't seem to provide any very persuasive evidence, and I didn't want to join the toadies and the serfs who just bet on you in the hope of winning the lottery. So shouldn't I expect, if any of your ethics as alleged to true, slightly preferential treatment? I'm already beginning, of course, to cringe and grovel a bit, but you see where I'm going with it. This is my response to Pascal, at any rate. It's better than Bertrand Russell's much more pragmatic response. He was asked, well, what will you do if you were ushered to the pearly gates and he's really there? And instead of saying what I would say, which is, I don't believe in her to begin with, he said, he'd say, oh Lord, I don't think you quite gave us enough evidence. This, I think, would not cut it in the case of either a compassionate or an uncompassionate one. But if you don't do the argument from design and the self-evident nonsense of that, you have to do the self-evident immorality of the wager. In other words, this is not a reinforcement of ethics at all. It's not. It's an appeal to immorality, or at least amorality, the very most amorality, I would say. It is an appeal to the most abject self-interest, and it doesn't deserve to be called by any other name. Now, I take a different position from all of these, and I'll briefly summarize it. I don't wish it was true. Many people, including many of my atheist friends, say, it'd be nice if it was true, but I just don't believe it. There's no evidence for it. Sometimes that position is also called agnostic. We can't know. I say, thank God it isn't true. What if it were true that you were born, lived your entire life, died, and carried on living under a permanent, inescapable, cradle-to-grave and beyond, round-the-clock surveillance? Who wants this to be true? That's what I want to know. Who wishes this was true? Who desires that to be the case? What could be more hellish? It's the definition of unfreedom. It's the origin of totalitarianism. I've been to North Korea, for example, where you have the right, as a North Korean, to get up in the morning and go to bed at night praising the leader all day. Just like it says in the Bible, endless praise for the Lord, all the time. We only get this at Christmas. And not so bad, well, some of us get it all the time, but there's no escaping. But you can die in North Korea and get out of it that way. If you're very brave and very lucky, you can defect from North Korea. But if you are a believing Christian or Jew or Muslim, you can't. You want it to go on. You want it never to stop, the chance to abase yourself at the feet of someone who only, it seems to me in a fit of absence of mind, created you at all. What kind of horror is this? So the only argument that I think one is left with, the only argument a self-respecting person can actually give his endorsement to, is that of anti-theism, or one might say mesotheism, as opposed to the celestial Pyongyang that's offered us even by the most gentle of our shepherds, or would-be shepherds. 2 minutes is all I need to round up. Some people say, well, it's obviously all nonsense and so on, and some of it's rather sinister, and some of it is a bit dangerous. But look, people often behave better because of it. It's a way of inculcating ethics. Not everyone's going to do philosophy. Not everyone's going to do physics. You know, if they go to church, they'll hit it. All right then. This is probably not the worst place to suggest the current example. It exercises us all. I just take the one case, the Holy Land itself, the land of Palestine, Israel. I once heard Abba Eban make a speech in this very city. He was then Israeli foreign minister, saying the great thing about this dispute is it's easy to solve. You don't always hear that, but it's true. Ever since the Balfour Declaration and before, it's been very clear. There are two populations roughly equivalent in size, not exactly, in the same territory with good claims to it. Partition, a share out. It could be done easily. Most Jews support it in America and in Israel. It is, officially at least, this is open to doubt in some ways, the view of the PLO, it's the view of the international community, it's certainly the view of many Palestinians, a two-state solution. Why is that impossible? A group of Messianic settlers who believe that if they can pull all Jews into Palestine from around the world and make them all convert to the right orthodoxy, the Messiah will come. They are opposed by a group of people who say, you're quite wrong in thinking God gave this land to the Jews. It's absolutely untrue. In fact, we know to the contrary, he gave it to the Muslims. And you must all get out. And your people must all either die or go home. They make progress difficult too, and I don't need to tell you what the other faces of Islamic jihad are like. And then this country, the naturally compromising group of fundamentalist Christians who say, let us prevent the Israelis from making the compromise they want, because if Armageddon comes, then the Messiah, our Messiah, will come, and he'll convert the Jews and murder all those who don't convert and all others who won't convert either. And that's the ideal solution. These three monotheisms have made life unbearable, unlivable in this small territory that they claim as holy. This must be the most prayed over, the most religious territory in our history. See what religion has done to that. And they're quite willing to have the life destroyed of everyone in this room on this proposition, any one of the three or in combinations. Not only willing to do it, but eager to do so. I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, with a record like this, we have to begin using our brains a bit more. And we have to conclude, I think we are left with no other conclusion, that human emancipation, the story of human freedom, the story of our becoming upright and thoughtful and courageous begins where religion leaves off. And the sooner we outgrow it, the better. And the more we organize to defeat it, the healthier we shall be. So I invite you to join me in this struggle, which I promise you will last the rest of your lives, but will be worthwhile. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. After hearing Christopher Hitchens trash Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and Mother Teresa, I must confess, first and foremost, that he is an equal opportunity offender, and that I look forward to his next book, which surely must be titled Buddha, You Big Fat Bastard. Or I've debated the subject of God and religion against many eminent scholars and writers, indeed an extremely worthy adversary this evening. And I started this at the University of Oxford, where I served as rabbi for 11 years. And every year, at the beginning of the year, we had a science versus religion debate, featuring Professor Richard Dawkins every time, who was noted as arguably the world's best-known evolutionist, Professor Colin Blakemore, the most illustrious names, mostly in evolutionary doctrine. And at first I was convinced that religion and the people we put up against them, including myself, would be positively trounced by the scientists. Because science replaced religion. Because religion has been proved to be everything that Christopher Hitchens said it is. Hollow and vacuous, murderous and evil. And I was astonished at the paucity and parvity of the arguments that I heard from the world's leading scientists. So much so that towards the end, the debates weren't even a contest. Every single time at Oxford University, the religious scientists, or if it was myself and the group of rabbis debating them, we won. And I'm going to tell you why. It wasn't because we were debating well. And by the way, I wrote a book called Moses of Oxford, and the chronicle of some of the debates are here. It's because you can't defend atheism. You can't defend nothing. It's amazing that Christopher Hitchens would say in his debate that one page of Stephen Hawking is more awe-inspiring than the book of Genesis. And I had the great pleasure and privilege of hosting Stephen Hawking at Oxford. He loves babies. He held my little girl, who she's now 6, in his arms with these pictures. He always wanted to hold babies. You know what the amazing thing is? Without the book of Genesis, Stephen Hawking would never have lived. Who said that a crumpled body destroyed and racked by disease is even valuable? Why was he not aborted? Why was he not euthanized? Where rational logic would lead us to conclude that a man who can only take from society and never give back in a world of limited resources should be put to death, should certainly not be sustained, should be aborted. Why do you think his first wife was such a devoutly religious Christian? And she said the only thing that got her through his illness was her faith that her husband was more than a collection of broken limbs, that he had an infinite sanctity to himself before he dazzled the world with his extraordinary intelligence. Do you know why till today Adolf Hitler mystifies us? Do you know why till today Adolf Hitler continues to grab our imagination? It wasn't only that he's evil, because there are many evil men. It was that he was rational. His evil intrigues us because we can't completely refute it. Why shouldn't we euthanize the mentally handicapped? Or those who will only ever be a burden to society? Who says that life is sacred? You mean accidental mutation and evolutionary development is sacred? The only difference between you and a primate is that your genes made more mistakes in duplicating their DNA. That's all. And if you are completely consumed with deleterious mutations such that you are now a burden to your parents who can barely afford you, and we only have a limited number of hospital rooms, why shouldn't you be euthanized? I first began thinking when I was studying evolutionary doctrine, which I studied at great length to write this book and to prepare for these debates. It struck me that Hitler was an evolutionist, that he really brought race theory to human theory. And then I chanced upon this quotation from Sir Arthur Keith, Britain's leading evolutionist during the Second World War, as Christopher Hitchens, I'm sure, will verify. To see evolutionary measures and tribal morality being applied vigorously to the affairs of a great modern nation, we must turn to Germany of 1942. This is Britain's leading evolutionist writing. We see Hitler devoutly convinced that evolution produced the only real basis for a national policy. The means he adopted to secure the destiny of his race and people were organized slaughter. The German Führer, as I have consistently maintained, is an evolutionist. He has consciously sought to make the practice of Germany conform to the theory of evolution. It was often said in 1914 by evolutionists that Darwin's doctrine of evolution has bred war in Europe, particularly in Germany, the first stirrings of a master race theory. Where did that come from, master race? Couldn't come from Genesis, that piece of crap document that says that all people are created equal, enshrined in our Declaration of Independence. That silly Declaration of Independence, it's a document written on the 4th of July, 1776.
Promulgated, not in Genesis.
It's based on what's written in Genesis. In 1935, a committee of psychologists, Sir Arthur Keith writes, representing 30 nations, issued a manifesto in which it was stated that war is the inevitable outcome of Darwin's theory. Races struggle for survival. Those who are superior will destroy those who are inferior in the struggle for limited resources on the earth, just as lions eat zebras. Darwin subtitled his famous book, The Origin of the Species by Natural Selection, published in 1861, with the provocative subtitle, The Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life. And he famously wrote, and by the way, Thomas Huxley, of course, the great apostle of evolution, wrote, no rational man cognizant of the facts based on evolutionary doctrine believes that the average Negro is the equal, still less the superior, of the white man. Race theory all came from evolution. Race theory came from the belief that blacks were the missing link. They even look like primates. Where did talk like this come from? From the book of Genesis? Find it! George Gaylord Simpson, one of the greatest evolutionists of all time, wrote, "Evolution does not necessarily proceed at the same rate in different populations, so that among many groups of animals it is possible to find some species that have evolved more slowly, hence are now more primitive as regards some particular trait or even overall. It is natural to ask, as many have asked, whether among human races there may not similarly be some that are more primitive in one way or another. It is indeed very possible to find singular characteristics that are probably more advanced and more primitive in one race than in another." This is where the whole idea of pigmentation came from. If you had darker skin, you were less evolved. To be Caucasian and white, to be a European, was to be more advanced. Listen to two quotations. One of them is by Adolf Hitler, the other is by Charles Darwin. I want you to guess which is which. First, the more civilized so-called Caucasian races have beaten the Turkish hollow in the struggle for existence. Looking to the world at no very distant date, what an endless number of the lower races will have been eliminated by the higher races who are more civilized throughout the world. Second quotation. In nature, there is no pity for the lesser creatures when they are destroyed so that the fittest may survive. Going against nature brings ruin to man. It is only religious impudence to demand that we overcome nature. They're difficult to choose between them, right? Because they're virtually identical. The first was Charles Darwin, who directly predicted that superior races would wipe out lower races. The second was Adolf Hitler, who implemented his plan to perfection. It's amazing, and this is why no scientist, no Christopher Hitchens, no atheist can ever defeat religion in debate, because they have no system of values, none. I challenge Christopher Hitchens to give us any system of authoritative values that can replace a religion, simply to tell us that Stephen Hawking, prior to writing a book, was as important as a man who could walk without a wheelchair. That his life was as sacred that he should not have been put to death or aborted. I challenge him to give us a single system of values that would say that his life was valuable, and he won't find it. It doesn't exist. In fact, the power of religion, folks, is not where it gives you fantastic insights as to where you're going when you die. Those are cheap religions that deal with human superstition. I agree with all that. I hate superstition. I purposely open umbrellas in the house, and I'll walk under ladders, and religion. God is God. He's not the Godfather. But the power of religion is that when God said, "Do not kill," it was God who said, "Do not kill." And you have no right to interpret it. You can't say, "Do not kill white people," but you can kill blacks. You can't say, "Do not kill Aryans," but you can kill Jews. Gideon Hausner, the Attorney General of Israel, charged with prosecuting Adolf Eichmann in 1961, was famously asked in his book tour, which encompassed the whole world, he said that the most common question asked of him, and he wrote this in the second edition of the book 3 years after its first publication, the book Justice in Jerusalem. He said, "People ask me everywhere, you were in a courtroom for 143 days with a man responsible for implementing the final solution. What was it like? What was the scariest thing about Adolf Eichmann?" And you know what Hausner said? He said the most terrifying thing about Adolf Eichmann was that he was a perfectly normal human being. Had Eichmann sat there with a knife cutting out his intestines the way Charles Manson did, writing helter-skelter with his blood, he killed these people because he was sick. But Eichmann, read the book, was an exemplary husband, wrote to his wife every day of his captivity, an exemplary father. Exhibited the most genteel manners. How could a man who's killed 6 million people be normal? Answer, would you feel bad killing 6 million cockroaches? They had laws against murder in Germany, but they were Hitler's laws. They can be interpreted to fit whoever he saw as fit. But when God says, "Do not kill, do not kill," and I know that Christopher Hitchens, who is one of the most decent and moral of all American journalists, who is accredited as an expatriate from Britain having come here, I know that he really believes this and has absorbed it, because he is the only one to have gone against the grain of his own liberalism to challenge his core constituency, who so respect him, to come out in favor of the war in Iraq for one reason. Because he wrote such an eloquent piece on how Saddam gassed the Kurds in Halabja A man who gasses people has no right to run a country, whatever other considerations. We Jews know what it's like to be gassed. And that man was the first to ever gas his own people. That is one of the 10 commandments in action. There is no argument for the sanctity of life other than man is created in God's image. Everything else is quality of life. And once quality of life is gone, go to Dr. Kevorkian. In one of my debates with Dawkins, I said to him, we both knew, in the center of Oxford, there was a woman who would come every day to beg. She would defecate and she would pee. She was an eyesore on Carfax, the ancient Oxford city center where Christopher Hitchens studied as well. Balliol, right? Right near there. I said, well, why shouldn't we just kill her? Why shouldn't we kill her? I promise you, they had no good answer. In fact, if you don't believe me, Sir Francis Crick, who died July the 29th of this year, very sadly, won the Nobel Prize, as you know, for decoding the DNA molecule. He famously suggested at a British scientific conference that morality be redefined, beginning with birth. He wanted the birth of children to be redefined till 2 days after parturition, so that a baby could be examined for defects. And if the defects were determined to be sufficiently deleterious, the baby could be eliminated with impunity because it was not yet alive. Similarly, he proposed that death be redefined to the age of 85, at which a man will be declared legally dead, and he will be inherited by his children, and the man will be euthanized because after 85, people are no longer productive. Because for evolutionists, morality comes down to what is good for the species. It is not good for the species to invest resources into individuals that can no longer contribute to the species. They cannot procreate, they cannot work, etc. And then Christopher Hitchens says to us, we know so little about the world, that's true. The Zohar says, Tachas yediyah shelo nedoacha. The more we learn, the less we know. That's what the Oracle of Delphi told Socrates. He said he was the smartest man because he knew he didn't know. But rather than us not understanding the universe, the reason we know so little today, ladies and gentlemen, is because of its extraordinary complexity. Scientists are mind-boggled, dazzled by the extraordinary complexity of creation. And I wanted to bring some examples from a very recent popular science book by Bill Bryson called The Brief History of Everything. Sadly, I forgot it at home, and I therefore must rely on things that this book was published 10 years ago. This is science that's 10 years out of date. If the Earth were an inch closer or further from the sun, human life as we know it would be impossible, an inch. If it were not tilted on its axis 23 degrees, why is the Earth tilted on its axis, for God's sake? But if it were not, huge mountains of ice would pile up from the water vapor of the oceans. The Earth revolves at a speed of 1,000 miles per hour. If it were to revolve at only 100 miles per hour, night and day would increase 10 times in duration. Plants would be scorched in the day, seedlings would be frozen at night. If the moon were just a bit closer to the Earth, and we are the only planet that has a planet revolving, our moon is unique in the solar system, the size of our moon and its proximity to Earth, the tide would flood all lands, including the high mountains. If the oceans were deeper, carbon dioxide and oxygen would all be absorbed, and no plants could exist. Isaac Asimov wrote, in man, there was a 3-pound brain, which as far as we know, is the most complex and orderly arrangement of matter in the universe. Now you might say, this evolved through evolution. Let me read to you Thomas Huxley, and let's see who's being irrational. Let's see who's being irrational here. Here's Thomas Huxley writing about evolution. A proportion of favorable mutations, now you know that evolutionary doctrine says there is no God, and essentially, or it doesn't have to be a God, accidental mutations in the DNA code as they replicate themselves are what are responsible for the advances in the human organism. Here's Huxley. A proportion of favorable mutation of 1 in 1,000 does not sound like much, but it's probably generous. A total of 1 million mutational steps sound a great deal, but it's probably an understatement. With this proportion, we clearly have to breed 1 million strains. That's 1,000 squared to get one containing 2 favorable mutations and so on. 1,000 to the millionth power when written out. This is to get 3 favorable mutations. And to develop the human eye, you would need perhaps 10, 12 million favorable. Just to get 3, you would need, the figure becomes 1 with 3 million zeros after it. This is one of the greatest evolutionists of all time writing. And that would take 3 volumes of 500 pages each just to write. This is how he finishes the quote. No one bet on anything so improbable happening. And yet, miraculously, it has happened! Ta-da! The complexity of the universe is so impossible for us to fathom. And you know, so what evolution did is say, well, we have 14 billion years to work with. Folks, you can have 14 quadrillion years and you're never going to get the complexity of the human eye. They have never identified a single favorable mutation under laboratory conditions. Besides the Drosophila, they've taken a couple of moths and they've changed color, they weren't eaten by birds. That's it! It's evolutionists and scientists who are irrational. Transitional links. Darwin promised they would be found. We haven't found any of them. Evolution is largely a discredited theory. Don't believe me. Dawkins debated the late Professor Stephen Jay Gould of Harvard. I was there. In the Sheldonian Theater, which I'm sure Christopher remembers, at Oxford. And Gould came along and said, we got to be honest that evolution is done. We now have, but he wasn't a theist. We now have to go to the hopeful monster theory, the belief that there's great genetic leaps. This is a discredited theory, and it's based on pure faith. I challenge anyone here to name a favorable mutation, just one, and you would need tens of millions to produce the human eye. In conclusion, I want to read one thing to you and I'm done. The eyes, this is just from a biological textbook that I picked up and I quoted from it in my book. Oh, here, how about this? Some 12 million nerve endings will form in a baby's nose to help it detect fragrances or odors in the air. More than 100,000 nerve cells will be devoted to reacting to Beethoven's Fifth Symphony or the ticking of a Swiss watch. The piano has only 240 strings, but the baby's ears will have more than 240,000 hearing units to detect the smallest variation in sound. The baby's eyes, which begin to form at 19 days, will have more than 12 million screen points per square centimeter. The retina, or light-sensitive portion of its eye, will have more than 50 billion such points. We're talking about something which is infinitely, infinitely more complex than a plasma television. So to say that the argument from design is nonsense that should be ignored is an astonishing leap of faith. Thank you very much.
Yes, by all means, close to the mic. If I'm inaudible, please let me know. I am bound to say that it seems there's been a bit of a collapse of standards at my old university. It was actually at Oxford in the late 19th century where the first ever debate between evolution and creationism was held between Huxley and Bishop Wilberforce. Bishop Wilberforce was one of those who thought he knew actually how old the Earth was, so the Christians had a rather more primitive position. Then we're now living in at the point where you notice the religious no longer demand that only creationism be taught in school as they used to. They now demand equal time. It's another sign of their lack of confidence. But I feel I have to insist on a certain proposition. Reason has no dogma. Reason doesn't tell you you have to believe anything. It says your mind must be open to reason. We know that evolution has occurred because we have the record of molecular biology, and it's in the fossil record. We cannot be certain how it occurred, and there certainly are major differences between Doctors Dawkins and Gould, as there were between both of them and Charles Darwin and the theory of natural selection. Natural selection is not the theory of evolution, it is a theory of evolution. If distinctions like this need to be made at this late date in a hall like this, ladies and gentlemen, I think we're in more trouble than I had suspected. Either that or that beer, which I notice is called the Chosen Ale, has had a better effect on the rabbi than it has on me. Now, just on a couple of clean-up points. The author of the Declaration of Independence is well known to have been one Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson had nothing but contempt, never expressed anything but contempt for the churches, for organized religion. He had a respect for faith, though none of his own, and a disbelief in the supernatural. And you can buy at any Unitarian bookstore to this day the Jefferson Bible, which is what he found was left if he took a pair of scissors and cut out everything in the Bible that could not by any intelligent person be believed. It makes for a slender, convenient read. I recommend it. To say that he is a votary of Genesis, I'm sorry, that's an insult. Not to me, but to you. It's not true. It's true that genocide isn't recommended in Genesis. You have to read several books on before you are commanded to leave not one child of the Amalekites behind. And the rabbi knows this to be true, and some of you may know it to be true as well. There are learned debates between rabbis in Israel today, including rabbis of the Israeli Defense Forces, on whether or not that commandment is still extant. In other words, whether the fact that there are no more Amalekites means that the commandment doesn't work anymore, and learned commentaries are published on the possible applicability of this genocidal commandment to present-day conditions. To know this is to tremble at the effect of religion on a people who, Rabbi and I both have a share in this, are not supposed to have a reputation for bovine stupidity, let alone for racism, let alone for superstition. I'm forced to take this seriously, given what I've just had to hear. I personally think I probably could overthrow the arguments for National Socialism in a fairly short time. I've had great difficulty persuading myself that its founder and leader was a rational person. I wouldn't have declared war on the Soviet Union, the British Empire, and the United States on the same year myself, hoping to have a 1,000-year Reich. It wouldn't be the right way to go about it. He wouldn't be the first person to say that the unfit should be killed. The rabbi is perfectly correct in saying that many humanists, Margaret Sanger was one who flirted with it, one of the founders of the family planning movement, that there was a belief that the unfit didn't deserve a chance. And you can find this in ancient philosophy as well. But there's nothing secular about it. It is a barbarous superstition. It is an inheritance from our primitive, fearful past. There's no secular case to be made for genocide. Indeed, the whole point about, excuse me, not genocide, for eugenics, the whole point about our side is that we revere the brain. If Hawking had no limbs at all and only a brain, we'd like him the better for it. But we wouldn't say, we would have something to ask perhaps about the person who designed him like that. The chances anyone would ever notice that Hawking had a brain were very slight. And I noticed that when people say, well, look at all we have to be thankful for, or look at what's so wonderful, they mean when the baby falls out of the window and bounces on the roof of a soft car, don't they? They say, oh, there, God had it in his hands. They have nothing to say when the ditches are full of dead babies, and no one did a thing. Look at the beauty of the design of the plague bacillus, or the incredible eagerness and hunger and ruthlessness and beauty of the cancer cell, or the cobra. Who created all this, is what I want to know. If someone wants to take credit for this creation, let them take credit for the whole thing, and for all the despair and misery that goes with it, for the babies that are born without brains at all, or with cancer, or with no chance of living beyond a day. Who's responsible for that? In what mysterious way is the divinity moving when this occurs? Wouldn't you rather think, harsh though it is, that at least it is random? But no, the solipsism must go on. I had no idea how bad Bill Bryson's work was till this evening. You can look at the solar system, okay? I forget how many planets has it got, 9, 10? They keep finding more baby ones, okay? Well, I know this much, I know how many of them there are, but most of them are either too fucking hot or too fucking cold for anything remotely like life to occur. That's just one solar system. That's how many abortions. Nature aborts. Who doesn't know that? Nature takes life. Nature kills. Nature kills in the womb. It must do. It's part of our evolutionary pattern. It's part of what we're born with, I'm sorry to say. Nature aborted half the planets in the solar system. What are the conditions on our own hollow little planet, our wonderful little planet? Well, a good deal of our planet is either too fucking hot or too fucking cold as well to support life. And it's on a knife edge climatically, as we all know. We don't know why. I don't claim to know, by the way, why there's a climatic crisis at the moment. But I know that there is one. I'm hoping someone will tell me who's mandated it and for what reason. Or is it possible that it's an event in the evolution of the solar system? I think it's a great deal more likely, unless you have the solipsism to believe that the conditions have favored your own emergence, they must be benign. That's not modesty. Above all, it's not objectivity. It isn't detachment. It's not rationality. It is none of the above. It's mere superstitious self-centeredness. I yield my 2 minutes, ladies and gentlemen. I think if I haven't persuaded you by now, I shan't succeed. I think the Rabbi and I both agreed before this began that we would make the assumption that nobody comes here just to sit and listen, and that we all know what we're here for. So I yield back my time and I give it to you. And don't waste it. Bye now.
I find it astonishing that a champion of the oppressed, as distinguished as Christopher Hitchens, would so skew the historical record about who is responsible by far for the greatest atrocities in the history of mankind. First of all, let me say absolutely that as far as why so many bad things are done in the name of religion, it's simple. God did not give 10 commandments, which is the essence of religious morality. He gave 2 tablets of 5 commandments each. They didn't come on one long list. Simple point. First 5 are all about God. I'm the Lord your God. You shall know of the gods before me. The second is all about morality. We call this ethical monotheism. It's the twin pillars of religion. A, there's a God who is the source of all right and wrong, and you have no right to interpret it. B, God's first demand of you is compassionate, moral, and ethical behavior. And if you betray that, you've betrayed God. If you look at any example of religious immoral behavior, it has all come down to a single point, which is that even religious people often think that they have a right to reinterpret morality, and they stray from the 10 Commandments. But I say that Christopher Hitchens has so significantly misrepresented the historical record because the greatest atrocities in the history of the world have been performed by secular atheistic regimes. Adolf Hitler hated religion, despised it. That's why they chose the swastika. It was a pagan symbol. Nietzsche was trumpeted as the great philosopher of Nazism, and what did Nietzsche say? The core of Nietzsche's philosophy can be reduced to this, that the Jews played a giant joke on the world called this buffoon named the Christian. The Jews took great, strong, courageous Teutonic knights and instilled within them compassion and mercy and long-suffering. What the heck? And the Germans were dumb enough to swallow this crap, this Jewish lie, this fable. Read Martin Bormann's book, Hitler's Table Talk. It's riddled with Hitler's hatred of all religion because religion took away from him his capacity to define morality. So he killed 12 million. How many did Mao Zedong kill? Between 30 and 50 million. I didn't see him believing in God. What about Stalin? Between 30 and 40 million. Not exactly a great lover of God or religion either. How about Pol Pot in Cambodia, who killed 1 out of 3 Cambodians? If you want to get to a numbers game, it is Paul Johnson, who happens to be Catholic, but I know that, I assume you know him, Christopher, the great British historian, who I had the pleasure of drinking a lot of good whiskey with when I lived in England. It was the chosen single malt, actually, better than the beer. He's the one that estimates that secular, utopian, atheistic regimes have killed 100 million people in the 20th century alone. That's in his book, Modern Times. 100 million people. And it's interesting. Look what Christopher Hitchens is doing. Look at the illogical, irrational core of his arguments. He begins with a religious argument that life is sacred and life cannot be taken. He then uses religion against himself. Oh, now that I embrace and endorse do not kill, why does God command us to kill all these people like the Amalekites? Now that's a good question, but the problem is, where did you begin with the premise that we shouldn't be doing that anyway? Everyone believed, the reason why these great dictators killed so many, 30 million, 50 million, Stalin didn't hate the Russians, he just wanted to industrialize. So he collectivized the farms and people died of starvation. That's what Mao did in the Cultural Revolution. The larger good, rationally, when you only have your mind, it makes sense that 1 billion people's needs outweighs 30 million so they can die. That's what Castro, another secular, atheistic communist, did in Cuba. If you had AIDS, they stuck you in a prison forever. You didn't even commit a crime. You may have gotten it through blood transfusion, but that's logical. You see, why should one person's well-being threaten an entire population? The argument? Do not kill. This person's just as important as anyone else, unless they're morally culpable. That's different. Fascinating how you could begin. And you know, it was the philosopher Robert Nozick from Harvard who made the point. He called this cut flower ethics. And it's a trick that a lot of people in these debates use. And it's what Christopher is using tonight. You begin with religious ethics, 10 Commandments. Do not kill, life is sacred. You cut it out from where it grows in its soil. You now transplant it and say, we don't need religion, that's garbage. We'll just stay with the ethics. Guys, you know what happens to flowers when they're taken out of the soil? They wither and die. That's what happened to all these atheistic regimes. That's why so many people died. I'm not excusing the horrors in the name of religion. But if you have ethical monotheism, you can never do that. And that's why the Jewish people who have so insisted on ethical monotheism are not guilty of atrocities, thank God. As far as, Christopher's right. The Bible's commandments about destroying the Amalekites is something that Jewish scholars, because they have a conscience, have struggled with from time immemorial. And the best they've come up with is, first of all, it was God's commandment. We don't understand it. It can never be done today. The fact that some fanatics discuss it, well, we have a Baruch Goldstein, but we condemn people like him. But the most we've come up with is that Churchill, revered by the British and I think the whole West as the greatest statesman of the 20th century, ordered the indiscriminate bombing of entire civilian population centers. Dresden wiped out in a single night, 240,000 dead. Hamburg wiped out in a night, 800 bomber sortie, 200,000 killed. Why did they do this? It was the only way to destroy something very evil. And God was telling the Jewish people the Amalekites are very evil. I'm not even justifying it. I don't claim to understand it. It can never be done today. Final point. Thomas Jefferson was a deist. He rejected the part of religion that says that God supervises human affairs, which some philosophers have done, normally, most importantly, René Descartes. It's part of the Cartesian school of philosophy, but he was a deist. Deists believed that God created the world. It's also astonishing that Christopher says, Book of Genesis, not a single shred of useful stuff there, when the entire world believed in Aristotle's theory of the eternity of matter, that everything that's been here has always been here. It was the Book of Genesis that predated it by at least 2,000 years, or it's 1,500 years, that said that all of creation came into existence in an instant. Creation ex nihilo, something that it took science 3,500 years to discover. Thank you very much.
Sure, a very quick question to Mr. Hitchens. There was recently a research published, I think, in Time or Newsweek, showing that religious people in this country live longer. So for all practical considerations, if I'm debating whether I should believe or not believe, if the reward for believing is that I get to live longer because if I'm sick when I'm old, it's a useful tool, then why not?
Yeah, it's a very Pascalian thought, but I first doubt very much that it can be established who in the country is religious. I mean, I know, as everyone must know, that the claim that 3/4 of Americans believe in the virgin birth and the devil and all this stuff is demonstrably untrue. You can just stand in any American city on a Sunday morning and see that it isn't the case. They're lying to the pollsters, that's all. And I think to themselves and sometimes to their husbands and wives. And of course, by definition, because they have to their children, because they believe in this stuff. So I don't believe the finding can possibly be solid, which gives me the opportunity to make a very quick comment on what the rabbi just said, if I may, because he makes a point that I really must reply to, and it's a shrewd one too. What about secular callousness? I'll be quick. Two things. First, the National Socialist regime in Germany, as every other fascist regime in Europe, depended for its support on the Roman Catholic Church. Hitler had his birthday observed in the pulpits of the church every year, and every bishop and cardinal and priest did it. It was the concordat between Hitler and the Vatican that confirmed his regime in power. It was the Catholic Church that brought fascism to power in Spain, in Portugal, in Croatia, in Hungary, in Czechoslovakia. In Slovakia, the actual head of and in Croatia, the actual heads of government were in holy orders. Let's not mess around about this. The last time the Vatican ever said there was a just war was when it supported Franco's invasion of Spain to destroy the Spanish Republic. At the head of a fascist army composed actually mainly of Muslim mercenaries. There's ecumenical outreach for you, if you wish. I didn't choose North Korea for my example by accident either. Of course, if people believe in worship and in faith, they may turn to worshipping human beings, or indeed animals. It's been known to happen, and I'm sure it will happen again. Surely it was plain, though, that what I was arguing with was faith, by definition, the surrender of reason. Belief and faith, I began by saying, are among the cardinal vices. I didn't restrict my attack to monotheism. The Dalai Lama says he's been born again, and luckily for him, he's been born a king. I don't believe it. I don't believe it. It may seem innocent in his case, but credulity of that kind is always dangerous because it can always be exploited by people who aren't so innocent. If I didn't make this plain before, I trust that I have now.
We have another question.
Yes, I'm just wondering if not for religion, how is morality taught? Is man inherently good or inherently evil? And it must come from somewhere.
You're asking me?
Anybody, but yes, you.
Well, that is the question. That is the question the rabbi posed in his remarks.
Well, it's amazing that Christopher continues to go on that the Catholic Church was wrong for their concordat with Hitler. I couldn't agree with him more. I consider Pius XII to have been an evil man. I have said that to the great consternation of my Catholic brethren. It's amazing that Pope John Paul II...
Vicar of Christ on earth, though.
Correct.
Vicar of Christ.
I don't exactly accept that.
That's not an optional belief for a Catholic.
You'd be surprised that a lot of people in this room don't exactly agree with that. But,
what's the objection?
But what's amazing is that, Christopher, you're not telling us why any of this is wrong. I just don't get it. Deal with why we should not murder. Why should we not murder?
Well, that is the lady's question, too. Very well. By the way, we're in trouble if these questions are down to me, but I'll tell you. I think the Ten Commandments is part of the proof of what I mean. the Ten Commandments appear to make the rather insulting assumption that the Jewish people, until they'd wandered around in Sinai for a while, which, as you know, has been shown by Israeli archaeology to be a complete fabrication. But supposing they had, they'd been wandering for a long, long time before anyone told them that murder and theft were a mistake. Till then, they had not known this. It took a tablet. I have more faith in humanity than that. There are things I don't have to teach my children, neither do you, Rabbi. There are certain things that are innate. If we had to be taught them, we'd keep forgetting. We know. Now, it's a very interesting question. Why is that? Where does conscience come from? We don't know is the answer to that. We have no idea. Why do people behave well when no one's looking and they won't get the credit? Why do they do that? We have no idea. But it is not because they're taught by God to do it. It's not because they're taught by the churches. We know that's not right. We know that's not true, in other words. The Ten Commandments go on to say, well, they start by saying God wants to be flattered. The first 4 are all about flattering God and his day. They've no morals or ethics to them at all. Then, killing is not condemned, murder is. I think, as I say, I think the Jewish people knew this. Theft, adultery is not recommended. Then it's forbidden to even think about it. You're not allowed to envy anyone else's property. Now, this is important because it's totalitarian. This is asking the impossible of people. There's a commandment that cannot be obeyed, that cuts against what is in us is innate. Actually, the feeling of covetousness is often very progressive. As Marx pointed out, if people were not covetous, if they weren't ambitious, if they weren't greedy, progress would not be made. They're forbidden to think about it. They're not allowed to emulate their neighbor, let alone to covet anything that is his, which includes his animals and his women. Who do you think dreamt this up? God or a load of Bronze-aged, bewildered people? And if it was innate to them, the good bits, they might be innate to us too. But that this is taught or handed down or revealed is not even a fairy tale. It's not even a sinister fairy tale. It's absolute nonsense.
Let me just respond to this. You know, this is so typical of a debate on religion these days, where you will first hear the atheists say that any submission to irrational non-reason is a crime. They will then begin with the presupposition that religion is stupid, therefore everything it says must be irrational and silly and dumb. And sadly, so many of you guys just embrace this wholesale. When this debate was advertised, it was the great intellectual Christopher Hitchens against the love advice guy, Rabbi Shmuley Boteach, typical. The religious idiot debates the great scientific giant genius. And that's what Christopher Hitchens is trying to do. That's what notice
what they told me, yeah.
Notice.
I didn't know they told you too.
Notice that the arguments are no longer rational. They're all about how dumb religion is. The a priori argument is this stuff doesn't make sense, so let's sort of laugh at it. This is not a scientific discussion at all. It's not a rational discussion. But I do want to respond to some of these things. Number one, totally evaded the question of where do not kill comes from, why we should not kill. Totally and utterly evades it. Now, other atheist thinkers who I've debated at least have given a rationale, and the rationale is simple. It goes like this. If you kill me, my relatives will kill you, and then your relatives will kill my relatives, we'll depopulate the earth. That's the classical humanist argument against murder. It's the only one that's ever been posited that makes any kind of sense. Of course, it's a ridiculous and singularly silly argument. As Dennis Prager rightly points out, it presupposes that you can't get away with murder. It presupposes that if you kill someone, you'll be caught, hence there will be retribution and retaliation. We know you can get away with murder. Look at O.J. Simpson. And there's a 1,000 other examples. So the argument disappears, and what Christopher is doing is just evading it, and this is not a scientific discussion. Just saying religion, when you're asked, where does morality come from? Answer, religion is dumb. 10 Commandments are so stupid. That's just not a rational response. I will deal with these questions rationally, because I believe that religion is rational. Notice that
Briefly, since we do want the questioners to be able to ask their questions.
Okay, but I have to respond.
Okay, but the response could go on for quite some long while.
I'll make it very short.
Yes,
okay. Notice that Christopher doesn't believe in God. He believes in human beings. He believes they're innately moral. He believes that they have a conscience. Now, if that isn't a stupefying act of irrationality given history, see, I thought before people make statements that claim to be rational, they study the facts. The facts are, folks, that from the beginning of time, human beings have indiscriminately slaughtered one another. What conscience? The fact is that war is the natural state of mankind, as Darwin predicted it would be, but he did that from the record. The fact is that adultery is at 60% in the United States for men. Some say for women it's almost the same. Robert Wright wrote in his book, The Moral Animal, that it should not even be considered a sin because it's natural. I want to hear one good argument why we haven't it's not criminal, in some states it is, but why haven't we said this isn't a sin? We now know that men are not naturally monogamous, and maybe women aren't. That's the latest evolutionary books as well. Where did monogamy come from? Where did bans on incest come from? So you'll say it's because the brother and sister will have a child with a baby growing out of its, with a head growing out of its armpit, a second head or something. She can have contraception. Where does this morality come from? To say that human beings have a conscience is a stupefying act of belief that is utterly contradicted by all the facts. Whoever believes in man after Auschwitz has relegated human beings to a form of deity. They now believe in man rather than God, and it is not supported by the historical record.
This is from Mr. Hitchens. You've talked a lot about geopolitics, huge numbers of people, and of course a lot of negative events, atrocities, murder, and so forth. What I'm wondering is, with ordinary people who don't wield much power, which is most of us, let's face it, positive small acts such as tutoring adult illiterates, visiting sick children who are not our children, who we may not even know, things of that nature. I'm brought to mind the quote by Mahatma Gandhi, if you want to find yourself, lose yourself in service to others. Very small positive acts. Where do you think the motivation to perform these comes from, and would a secular lifestyle or a religious lifestyle be more conducive in encouraging more people to take these acts upon themselves?
When the National Health Service started in Britain, it's considered the great socialist achievement, there was an interesting discovery was made. You didn't have to pay people to donate blood. The system never ran out of blood. People just came. You could always count on it. There was always enough in the blood banks. And Professor Richard Titmuss, a great socialist theoretician, wrote a book called The Gift Relationship. How is that? That the thing appears to run on nothing. He postulated that some people have a need to help. They get just as much of a charge out of it, if you'll forgive the vulgarism, as they do from, say, finding the wallet on the back seat of a taxi and thinking, well, no one's going to know. Of the two, I prefer finding an enormous wallet on the back seat of a taxi. I'm not a particularly compassionate person. I mean, I would make sure that the guy had lots of money already and so on. I'd rationalize it, but I would be doing that. Why would I be doing that? I don't know why. I don't know why. But there is this need in ourselves to be nurturing. It's because the same as our attitude to children. If you see a woman being kicked in the stomach, your attitude ought to be one of revulsion. We know people who like this kind of thing, but we can count on a revulsion when we're speaking to ordinary people. If we see it's a pregnant woman being kicked in the stomach, I would bet that most people would think that was worse, even if they didn't believe that there was such a thing as an unborn child for reasons of political controversy. I would not trust anyone who didn't think that was worse. Now, why does everyone in this room obviously know what I'm talking about? Not because you were taught by your priests, ladies and gentlemen. That would be insulting you. That would be truly insulting you, in your ethics as well as your intelligence, obviously. So I didn't come here to be rude, did I? It's a risk I'll run, but I'm not. I didn't come here deliberately to make you think so little of yourselves that you wouldn't know what I was talking about without instruction from priests who claim to know God's will. Come on. We make progress to the extent we leave all that behind.
We'll take this into the streets or into the cafe. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I want to thank Mark Daly for doing a wonderful job of setting up the evening. Books by the two panelists are available for sale and signing now, and Mark Daly, I'm sorry, and the moderator. And feel free to go up and continue the conversation with them.
So we'll leave in about 10 or 15. You guys interview.
In this issue, do you have a stance?
Do I have a stance?
Yes. What is your stance? Who did you
I
lean?
think religion is a rotting heap of falsehoods, but I was sworn to neutrality during this debate.
Oh, okay.
I had to simulate it at least.
So did Shmuley finally lose one? Because he keeps talking, he keeps assuming a victory. What?
Well, horse-throated hectoring always loses to sardonic wit. You know, humor always trumps sort of demagoguery, which kind of implies to an audience an insult to their intellect. So that doesn't really win the crowd over. So if we judge this in terms of exit polls, I think that the points clearly went to the Hitchens side of the court.
He's very smooth with the mic, and I think that Shmuley was rattling some of the, he was rattling some stuff out there.
Yeah.
But I thought Shmuley looked very good, and you know, you gotta say that he's an passionate individual.
I love you're taking this kind of ESPN kind of an angle.
We do have a sports angle here, but I thought he was very smooth and very good, though he did rattle the mic.
Yeah, it was sort of the Iron Chef of theology.
As you are an expert on the cyber world, will the cyber world ultimately lead to a decimation of religion, or will it strengthen faith?
Actually, the savannas of cyberspace seem to have proven fertile ground for new religions. I mean, there are all sorts of techno-pagan cults and New Age belief systems that have taken root on the net, and done this whole Dungeons and Dragons sensibility has migrated onto the web and created little locuses, little nooks and crannies where people kind of re-envision religion for a technological age. You know, Mircea Eliade said that religious thought isn't exterminated by technological modernity. It rather just sort of springs up in new forms. So it's what he would call the resacralization of the secular world. That which has been pushed out of public space and the public mind offline has kind of migrated online, and you see a lot of sort of techno-mysticism on the web.
So you're looking at a new kind of expression of faith that's related to technology.
That's related to technology or is enabled by technology. There's a kind of a virtual commons in which people congregate online, and certain people who feel hounded from the public square are able to share their religious thoughts online.
What is the next book going to be?
The next book is called Don Henley Must Die, Growing Up Disaffected in the Desert of the Real. I like to call it a drive-by cultural critique, a social history, and an anti-memoir about growing up in the Badlands of Southern California in the 1970s.
Sacrilegious.
Yes. My pleasure.